think vintage Christmas cooking was just fruitcake and eggnog? Think again. Families across America once filled their holiday tables with spectacular dishes that took days to prepare, carried generations of tradition, and created memories that lasted lifetimes. Here are 30 vintage Christmas recipes that deserve to make a triumphant comeback to your holiday celebration. Tom and Jerry batter was once the Christmas cocktail that brought entire neighborhoods together for holiday cheer and warmth. This wasn't store-bought eggnog, but a labor-intensive creation requiring separated eggs, beaten whites whipped into stiff peaks, and yolks mixed with sugar and spices until they turned pale and thick. The batter was prepared days ahead and stored in the refrigerator, ready to be spooned into mugs and mixed with hot milk and rum when guests arrived. The result was frothy, creamy, and deeply warming, tasting like liquid Christmas with its blend of nutmeg, vanilla, and boozy richness. In Midwestern towns throughout the 1950s and 1960s, families kept Tom and Jerry sets specifically for the holidays, ornate bowls and matching cups that came out once a year. The drink represented hospitality and tradition, something you offered guests the moment they stepped through your door. Today, it has nearly vanished, replaced by simpler drinks, but it once stood as the centerpiece of Christmas entertainment. Mincemeat pie with real sweetened brandy was the Christmas dessert that took weeks to prepare and lasted through the entire season. Families started in November, chopping dried fruits, apples, raisins, and citrus peel, then mixing them with actual beef sweet, spices, molasses, and generous amounts of brandy or rum. The mixture was packed into stone crocks and left to age, the flavors melding and intensifying as the alcohol preserved everything. By Christmas, the mincemeat was dark, rich, and incredibly complex, tasting of cinnamon, cloves, citrus, and deep boozy sweetness. Baked in flaky pastry crusts, these pies were dense and substantial, meant to be served in small slices with hard sauce or whipped cream. In Victorian homes and early 20th century kitchens, mincemeat pie represented tradition and abundance, something you made once and enjoyed for weeks. The preparation was ritualistic, often done by grandmothers who guarded their recipes and aging techniques. Modern versions with no meat or alcohol cannot touch the depth of the original. Boiled Christmas pudding wrapped in cheesecloth was the centerpiece dessert that required 3 hours of steaming and months of aging. Families mixed dried fruits, breadcrumbs, suet, eggs, molasses, and brandy into a dense batter that was packed into pudding basins or wrapped tightly in cloth, then boiled in massive pots on Christmas morning. The smell of spices and fruit filled entire houses as the pudding steamed, transforming into something dark, moist, and incredibly rich. When finally unwrapped and turned out onto plates, the pudding was doused with more brandy and set aflame, arriving at the table wreathed in blue fire. The texture was dense and almost cake-like, studded with fruits that had plumped during cooking and infused with deep spice and alcohol flavors. In British and American households through the mid-20th century, Christmas pudding represented the height of holiday tradition, something prepared with ceremony and served with pride. Hidden coins and charms were often baked inside for luck. Today's instant versions miss the ritual entirely. Oyster stew on Christmas Eve was the elegant tradition that brought families together before midnight church services. Fresh oysters were gently heated in butter and milk until their edges just curled, then seasoned simply with salt, pepper, and sometimes a touch of celery salt or mace. The result was creamy, briny, and luxurious, tasting of the sea with rich dairy undertones. Served in fine china bowls with oyster crackers and sometimes a pat of butter floating on top, this was celebration food that felt special without being heavy. In coastal communities and inland cities alike, oyster stew represented Christmas Eve tradition from the 1920s through the 1960s, something families ate before attending services or after coming home from caroling. The preparation was quick but required attention, and the ingredients were expensive enough to feel indulgent. Children often received their first taste of oysters this way, learning to appreciate their delicate flavor. Today, it has largely disappeared, replaced by heavier meals, but it once defined Christmas Eve elegance. Hard sauce made with real butter and brandy was the crowning glory served atop plum puddings and mince pies throughout the holiday season. Butter was creamed until fluffy and white, then beaten with powdered sugar and generous amounts of brandy or rum until it formed a smooth, boozy spread. The sauce was shaped into decorative molds or simply formed into logs, then chilled until firm and sliced at serving time. The flavor was intensely buttery with sweet alcohol bite, melting immediately when placed on hot pudding and soaking into every crevice. In Victorian and early American kitchens, hard sauce represented sophistication and proper Christmas preparation, something made ahead and stored in the icebox for weeks. Families often had special molds shaped like holly leaves or Christmas symbols for forming the sauce. The ritual of making it was passed from mothers to daughters, with each family adjusting the brandy-to-butter ratio to personal preference. Modern desserts rarely feature this accompaniment, but it once transformed simple puddings into something genuinely luxurious and memorable. Ambrosia, made from scratch with fresh coconut, was the Christmas fruit salad that required genuine effort and produced spectacular results. Families bought whole coconuts, cracked them open, and painstakingly shredded the white meat by hand or with special graters. Fresh oranges were supremely segmented, removing every bit of membrane to leave only jewel-like fruit pieces. Pineapple was cubed, maraschino cherries were drained, and miniature marshmallows were added for sweetness and texture. The mixture was folded together gently and chilled overnight, allowing flavors to meld while the coconut softened slightly. The result was fresh, sweet, and tropical, tasting like sunshine during winter darkness. In Southern homes particularly, ambrosia represented Christmas morning tradition, something served at breakfast or alongside the main meal. The name meant food of the gods, and families took pride in their versions, adjusting fruit ratios and sometimes adding pecans or whipped cream. Modern versions use pre-shredded coconut and canned fruit, losing the textural contrast and fresh flavor that made the original so special and memorable. Crown roast of pork decorated with paper frills was the showstopper centerpiece that made Christmas dinner feel truly spectacular. Butchers prepared these special roasts by tying pork rib sections into circles, creating natural crowns that stood upright on platters. The center was stuffed with bread dressing mixed with sausage, apples, and herbs, while the roast itself was rubbed with garlic, salt, and pepper before slow roasting until golden brown. Paper frills were placed on each rib bone before serving, creating a festive appearance that drew gasps when the roast arrived at the table. The meat was tender and juicy, the stuffing absorbed porky juices, and the presentation was genuinely impressive. In mid-century American homes, crown roast represented prosperity and celebration, something families ordered specially and served with pride. The carving was ceremonial, each person receiving ribs and stuffing together. Today's simpler roasts cannot match the drama and elegance, though the preparation required skill and confidence that modern cooks often lack. Divinity candy, made on humid-free days, was the Christmas confection that tested both skill and patience while delivering pure sweetness. Sugar syrup was boiled to hardball stage, requiring precise temperature control and constant attention. Egg whites were beaten to stiff peaks separately. Then the hot syrup was slowly drizzled into them while beating continuously, creating a transformation from liquid to fluffy white candy. Vanilla and sometimes chopped nuts were folded in before the mixture was quickly dropped onto waxed paper in small mounds. The result was impossibly light, crispy on the outside but chewy inside, tasting like sweetened clouds with subtle vanilla depth. In Southern kitchens particularly, divinity represented holiday tradition and cooking mastery, something grandmothers made during cold, dry days when humidity would not ruin the texture. The candy was packed into tins and given as gifts or served from special dishes throughout the season. Modern candy makers rarely attempt divinity, intimidated by its requirements, but it once stood as proof of genuine kitchen skill and Christmas generosity. Baked Alaska Flamed Tableside was the dramatic Christmas dessert that combined ice cream, cake, and meringue into a theatrical dining experience. Sponge cake was cut into rounds and soaked with liqueur, then topped with brick ice cream that had been shaped and frozen rock hard. The entire construction was covered in thick meringue that was quickly browned under the broiler or with a blowtorch, creating insulation that protected the ice cream while the exterior caramelized. At the table, brandy was poured over and ignited, sending blue flames dancing across the white surface. The contrast of temperatures was shocking and delicious, hot meringue giving way to cold ice cream with tender cake underneath. In fancy restaurants and ambitious home kitchens during the 1950s and 1960s, Baked Alaska represented the pinnacle of dessert showmanship, something that required timing, confidence, and theatrical flair. Families remembered these desserts for decades, the drama making the occasion unforgettable. Today's simpler desserts cannot match the spectacle or the satisfying complexity. Syllabub whipped with sherry and cream was the Christmas dessert drink that blurred the line between beverage and pudding. Heavy cream was whipped with sweet sherry or Madeira, sugar, lemon juice, and sometimes beaten egg whites until it formed soft, billowy foam. The mixture was spooned into glasses and chilled, settling into layers with frothy top and slightly liquid bottom. The taste was boozy, creamy, and citrus bright, something between eggnog and whipped cream with sophisticated wine undertones. In colonial and Victorian Christmas celebrations, syllabub represented elegance and proper entertaining, something served from punch bowls or special syllabub glasses at holiday gatherings. The preparation was simple but required quality ingredients and proper technique to achieve the right texture. Children received versions made with milk and minimal alcohol, while adults enjoyed the full-strength creation. Modern desserts rarely combine wine and cream this way, but syllabub once stood as essential Christmas tradition, proving that simple combinations executed well-created genuine luxury and memorable flavor. Pfeffernusse cookies aged in tins were the German Christmas tradition that improved with time and filled homes with spice aromas. The dough combined flour, honey, molasses, and an elaborate spice blend of cinnamon, cloves, cardamom, white pepper, and anise, creating something intensely flavored and slightly mysterious. Small balls were formed and baked until firm, then rolled in powdered sugar while still warm. Fresh from the oven, they were hard and almost inedible, but stored in airtight tins for weeks. They softened into tender, chewy cookies that released complex spice flavors with every bite. German immigrant families brought this tradition to America, baking Pfeffernusse in November and storing them until Christmas when they reached perfect texture. The cookies represented patience and planning, showing that some things improved when given time. Children looked forward to them despite their unusual spiciness, learning to appreciate flavors beyond simple sweetness. Today, they appear mainly in specialty bakeries, but they once filled cookie tins across German-American households every December. Wassail bowl served hot with floating apples was the Christmas punch that welcomed guests with warmth and spice tradition. Apple cider was heated with cinnamon sticks, cloves, allspice, and sometimes orange peel, creating an aromatic base. Sugar and sometimes eggs were added for richness, while ale or wine provided boozy depth. Small apples or apple slices floated on top, bobbing like ornaments in the steaming liquid. The taste was sweet, spicy, and warming, with layered flavors that developed as the wassail sat on the stove throughout Christmas parties. In English and American traditions from medieval times through the mid-20th century, wassail represented hospitality and celebration, offered from large bowls with a ladle for serving. The ritual of wassailing included toasting to health and prosperity, making the drink about community as much as flavor. Families kept special bowls just for wassail, ornate pieces that came out once yearly. Modern hot apple cider cannot match the complexity or the ceremonial importance that wassail once carried at Christmas gatherings. Glazed ham studded with cloves and pineapple was the Christmas centerpiece that required hours of careful basting and patience. Whole bone-in hams were scored in diamond patterns, each intersection receiving a whole clove that would perfume the meat during cooking. Pineapple rings were pinned on with toothpicks, and maraschino cherries filled the centers, creating a retro but genuinely impressive appearance. The glaze combined brown sugar, mustard, and pineapple juice, brushed on repeatedly during roasting until it formed a mahogany coating that was simultaneously sweet, tangy, and slightly spicy. The meat underneath stayed moist and flavorful, the fat rendering into the glaze while the cloves infused subtle warmth throughout. In mid-century American homes, this ham represented prosperity and celebration, something families saved for Christmas Day when company would see and admire the presentation. Carving revealed pink meat glistening with glaze, and leftovers lasted for days, making sandwiches and casseroles. Today's simpler preparations miss the visual drama and layered flavors that made this ham unforgettable. Spring roll cookies pressed with carved molds were the anise-flavored Christmas tradition that turned cookie making into folk art. The dough was simple but precise, requiring beaten eggs, sugar, and flour in exact proportions, then flavored heavily with anise oil or extract. Once mixed, the dough was rolled smooth and pressed with intricate wooden molds carved with Christmas scenes, animals, flowers, or religious imagery. Each cookie carried detailed impressions that would remain through baking. The cookies were left to dry overnight before baking at low temperature, creating a distinctive white appearance and rock-hard texture when fresh. Stored in tins with anise seeds, they slowly softened into tender cookies with intense licorice flavor that either enchanted or repelled. In German and Swiss communities, spring roll represented heritage and artistry, with antique molds passed through generations. The preparation required time and proper technique, making these cookies about tradition more than convenience. Today, they remain niche specialties, but they once adorned Christmas tables across European American households every December. Chicken a la king, served in pastry shells, was the elegant Christmas luncheon dish that transformed leftovers into luxury. Diced chicken was combined with mushrooms, pimientos, and sometimes green peppers in a rich cream sauce thickened with egg yolks and sherry. The mixture was heated gently to avoid curdling, creating something velvety and sophisticated. Spooned into baked puff pastry shells or over toast points, it represented refined dining and proper entertaining. In tea rooms and home kitchens during the 1940s through 1960s, chicken a la king appeared at ladies' Christmas luncheons and bridge club gatherings, showing that leftover turkey or chicken could become something genuinely impressive. The preparation required skill with sauce making and attention to temperature, but the result was always creamy, flavorful, and satisfying. Families often made it on December 26th using Christmas turkey, extending the holiday meal into something that felt fresh and special. Modern versions with canned soup cannot match the silky texture and complex flavor of properly made a la king with real cream and careful technique. Sugar plums rolled by hand were the Christmas candy that required dedication and produced jewel-like confections. Dried fruits, including figs, dates, apricots, and prunes, were ground together with nuts, honey, and spices until they formed a sticky paste. Small portions were rolled into balls by hand, then coated in granulated sugar that sparkled like fresh snow. The candy needed no cooking, relying instead on the natural sweetness and binding properties of dried fruit and honey. The taste was intensely fruity and spiced, chewy and satisfying, with the sugar coating providing textural contrast. In Victorian and early 20th century Christmas celebrations, sugar plums represented the treats children dreamed about, the candies that danced in their heads according to famous poems. Making them was family activity, with everyone taking turns rolling balls and coating them in sugar. The candies stored well in tins and improved slightly with age as flavors melded. Modern versions are rare, but sugar plums once embodied Christmas sweetness and the magic of homemade confections created with care and imagination. Peppermint ice cream made in hand-crank freezers was the Christmas dessert that required family teamwork and delivered seasonal perfection. Custard base was prepared on the stove with eggs, cream, milk, and sugar, then cooled completely before peppermint extract and crushed candy canes were stirred in. The mixture was poured into the metal canister of an ice cream freezer surrounded by ice and rock salt. Then someone began the long process of cranking the handle. Children took turns, their arms growing tired as the mixture thickened and resistance increased. When finally frozen, the ice cream was pink-tinted, intensely minty, and studded with candy pieces that provided crunch. The flavor was refreshing yet creamy, tasting exactly like Christmas in frozen form. In families throughout the 1950s and 1960s, Making peppermint ice cream was holiday tradition that brought everyone together, creating memories as much as dessert. The hand-cranked texture was distinctive, smoother than modern commercial versions. Today's convenience cannot match the satisfaction and the anticipation that came from making ice cream together as family activity on Christmas Day. Standing rib roast carved tableside was the Christmas centerpiece that required confidence and created genuine ceremony. The massive roast, several ribs thick and richly marbled, was seasoned simply with salt, pepper, and perhaps garlic before slow roasting in low ovens. The exterior developed a deep brown crust, while the interior stayed perfectly pink and juicy, the fat rendering and basting the meat throughout cooking. When brought to the table whole, the roast was impressive in size and aroma, filling the dining room with beefy richness. The father or grandfather would carve ceremonially, slicing thick pieces that revealed the rosy interior and fell apart with tenderness. Each guest received slices with crispy exterior fat and tender meat together. In prosperous post-war American homes, standing rib roast represented abundance and celebration, something families saved for Christmas when they wanted to show both hospitality and success. The bones were saved for soup, ensuring nothing was wasted. Modern preference for smaller cuts misses the drama and the communal satisfaction of presenting and carving this magnificent roast before gathered family. Bourbon balls rolled in cocoa powder were the no-bake Christmas candy that adults appreciated more than children. Vanilla wafers were crushed into fine crumbs and mixed with powdered sugar, cocoa powder, chopped pecans, corn syrup, and generous amounts of bourbon. The mixture was rolled into small balls and coated in additional cocoa powder, then stored in tins where the flavors would intensify over days. The taste was sophisticated and boozy, with chocolate undertones and nutty crunch, definitely an acquired taste that children usually rejected. In Southern homes particularly, bourbon balls appeared on every Christmas candy plate, representing adult indulgence and regional pride. They required no baking, making them perfect for hot climates where ovens heated entire houses. The preparation was social, with women gathering to roll hundreds of balls together while chatting and sharing stories. These candies improved with age, the bourbon mellowing while the chocolate deepened. Today, they survive mainly in specialty shops, but they once adorned dessert tables at every Christmas party throughout bourbon country and beyond. Chestnut stuffing made from fresh chestnuts was the Christmas side dish that required patience, but delivered unmatched flavor and texture. Fresh chestnuts were scored with an axe, roasted until the shells split, then peeled while still hot to remove both outer shell and inner skin. The tender nuts were chopped and mixed with bread cubes, sautéed celery and onions, sage, butter, and broth, creating stuffing that was simultaneously hearty and delicate. The chestnuts added sweetness and meaty texture that no other ingredient could replicate, transforming ordinary stuffing into something genuinely special. The preparation was labor-intensive, with burns from hot shells considered inevitable, but the result justified the effort. In European and American traditions, chestnut stuffing represented Christmas luxury and the proper way to honor roasted birds. Street vendors sold roasted chestnuts throughout winter, making them associated with holiday celebration and cold weather comfort. Modern versions using canned chestnuts miss the subtle char and sweetness of fresh roasted nuts. This stuffing once defined Christmas dinner sophistication, proving that some traditions required genuine work and dedication. Fruitcake soaked in brandy for months was the Christmas tradition that divided families but represented serious baking dedication. Dried fruits were soaked in brandy overnight before being mixed with flour, eggs, butter, molasses, and elaborate spice blends. The batter was packed into pans lined with parchment and baked slowly at low temperature until dark and fragrant. Once cooled, the cakes were wrapped in brandy-soaked cheesecloth and stored in tins, with more brandy added weekly. By Christmas, they were moist, boozy, and incredibly dense, tasting of concentrated fruit and spice with serious alcohol undertones. In proper households, fruitcakes were made in November or even October, the aging process considered essential to achieving proper flavor and texture. They were sliced thin and served with tea or after dinner, meant to be savored slowly rather than devoured. Today's mass-produced versions cannot match the depth or the ritual of homemade fruitcake aged properly with quality ingredients and genuine patience. Cranberry orange relish made with whole oranges was the fresh Christmas condiment that required no cooking and delivered a bright flavor. Whole oranges, including peel, were cut into chunks and ground with fresh cranberries and sugar in hand-crank meat grinders. The mixture was vibrant red-orange, intensely tart, and slightly bitter from the orange pith. After chilling overnight, the flavors mellowed while the sugar dissolved, creating something that was simultaneously sweet, sour, and refreshing. The relish cut through rich meats beautifully, providing acid and brightness that balanced heavy holiday meals. In mid-century American homes, this represented modern convenience meeting tradition, something fresh and uncooked when everything else was roasted or baked. Children often helped feed cranberries and oranges into the grinder, watching the colorful mixture emerge. The raw freshness made it distinctive from cooked cranberry sauce, and families often made both, offering choice at the table. Today's reliance on canned sauce misses the vibrant flavor of fresh ground fruit. Buttercream frosted Yule log cakes were the Christmas dessert that required artistry and delivered woodland magic. Chocolate or vanilla sponge cake was baked thin, spread with buttercream or jam, then rolled into logs while still warm. Once cooled, the logs were frosted with chocolate buttercream textured with forks to resemble tree bark. Meringue mushrooms, marzipan holly, and powdered sugar snow completed the forest scene. The cake was light and creamy, the roll creating spirals when sliced that were beautiful and delicious. In French traditions adopted by American families, the Yule log represented ancient celebrations where actual logs were burned for luck. Making these cakes became a holiday ritual, with mothers teaching daughters how to roll without cracking. The finished logs were centerpieces on dessert tables, too pretty to cut, but too delicious to save. Today's simpler cakes miss the craftsmanship and imagination that made Yule logs genuine works of edible art representing Christmas magic. Persimmon pudding made from wild fruit was the Christmas dessert that connected families to the land and seasonal rhythms. Wild persimmons gathered after the first frost were pressed through sieves to create smooth pulp. Mixed with flour, sugar, eggs, milk, and spices, the batter was baked slowly until it formed a dense, dark pudding with custard-like texture. The flavor was unique and almost tropical, sweet with slight astringency that made it interesting rather than cloying. Served warm with hard sauce or whipped cream, persimmon pudding represented regional tradition, particularly in the Midwest and South, where wild persimmon trees grew abundantly. Gathering the fruit was family activity, with children climbing trees and adults catching fruit in sheets. The pudding appeared only at Christmas, making it special and anticipated. Modern grocery stores rarely carry persimmons, and the wild variety is nearly forgotten. But this pudding once stood as proof that nature provided abundance for those who knew when and where to look. Candied citrus peel dipped in chocolate was the Christmas confection that transformed waste into luxury treats. Orange, lemon, and grapefruit peels were simmered in sugar syrup multiple times until they became translucent and tender, absorbing sweetness while losing bitterness. Once dried, the strips were dipped in tempered dark chocolate and left to set. The result was sophisticated candy with intense citrus flavor, chewy texture, and chocolate richness. In European traditions brought to America, candied peel represented thrift and skill, using what others discarded to create something genuinely delicious. The preparation required patience and attention, with multiple cooking and drying stages spread over days. Families made these during December, storing them in tins for gifting and serving. The combination of bitter peel, concentrated sweetness, and dark chocolate created complex flavor that appealed to adult palates. Today's preference for simple sweets means candied peel has nearly vanished, but it once demonstrated how proper technique elevated humble ingredients into Christmas elegance. Floating island dessert served in crystal bowls was the Christmas finale that combined elegance with theatrical presentation. Custard sauce was prepared carefully, tempering eggs with hot milk until it thickened into smooth crème anglaise. Separately, egg whites were beaten with sugar until stiff, shaped into large meringue islands, and poached gently in simmering milk. The pillowy meringues were placed atop the cold custard just before serving, floating like snowy clouds on golden sea. Sometimes caramel was drizzled over for color and flavor contrast. The dessert was light yet rich, the textures completely different between creamy custard and airy meringue. In French-influenced American dining during the mid-20th century, floating island represented sophistication and proper technique. The presentation in glass bowls showed off the beautiful layers. Families served these at Christmas dinner when they wanted to impress guests while offering something less heavy than cake. Today's simpler puddings miss the visual drama and refined technique that made floating island genuinely memorable and special. Stollen bread stuffed with marzipan was the German Christmas tradition that required days of preparation and delivered rich reward. The yeast dough was enriched with butter, eggs, and milk, then loaded with dried fruits, nuts, and citrus peel that had been soaking in rum. A log of marzipan was placed in the center before the dough was shaped and allowed to rise slowly. After baking until golden, the loaves were brushed with melted butter and buried in powdered sugar while still warm. The bread was dense and rich, the marzipan creating sweet almond center surrounded by fruity, yeasty bread. In German households, Stollen was made weeks before Christmas and wrapped tightly, improving with age as flavors melded. Sliced thin and served with coffee or tea, it represented celebration and tradition passed through generations. The preparation required skill and patience, making Stollen about dedication as much as deliciousness. Modern bakery versions cannot match the depth of homemade Stollen made with care and proper aging. Eggnog made with raw eggs and heavy cream was the Christmas beverage that represented indulgence and tradition despite modern safety concerns. Fresh eggs were separated, the yolks beaten with sugar until pale and thick, then mixed with whole milk, heavy cream, and generous bourbon or rum. The egg whites were beaten separately until frothy and folded in, creating rich, thick beverage that coated your mouth. Freshly grated nutmeg was sprinkled on top of each serving. The taste was creamy, boozy, and luxurious, far richer than any commercial version could approach. In proper households, eggnog was made fresh on Christmas Eve or morning and consumed within hours, with everyone understanding the temporary nature of the treat. Children received versions with minimal alcohol, while adults enjoyed full-strength creation. The preparation brought families together, with someone designated to beat eggs, while others measured and mixed. Today's pasteurized store versions miss the silky texture and genuine richness of properly made eggnog with farm-fresh ingredients. Marzipan fruits shaped by hand were the Christmas candies that demonstrated artistic skill and patience with almond paste. Blanched almonds were ground with sugar and sometimes egg whites until they formed smooth, pliable paste that could be molded like clay. Small portions were tinted with food coloring and shaped into tiny fruits, complete with realistic details like apple stems and strawberry seeds. Each piece was painted and finished to look almost real, creating edible art that filled Christmas candy dishes. The taste was sweet and intensely almond, the texture slightly grainy but smooth. In European traditions, particularly German and Italian, marzipan represented both confectionery skill and Christmas celebration. Grandmothers would spend hours creating these tiny masterpieces, which were too beautiful to eat quickly. Children watched in awe as almonds transformed into fruit orchards in miniature. Today's commercial marzipan often uses shortcuts, but handmade versions once adorned Christmas tables as proof of dedication, artistry, and the magic of transformation. Brandied mincemeat tarts served warm were the Christmas dessert that combined tradition with portability and proper spicing. The mincemeat filling was prepared weeks ahead, aging in crocks until Christmas when it was spooned into tiny tart shells. Each tart received just enough filling before being topped with pastry stars or lattice, then baked until golden. Served warm from the oven, they released steam carrying cinnamon, clove, and brandy aromas that announced Christmas throughout the house. The combination of flaky pastry and rich, spiced filling made them irresistible despite their unusual name. In Victorian and early American traditions, mincemeat tarts were essential Christmas fare, something offered to guests who came caroling or visiting. The small size meant everyone could have one without committing to a large slice of pie. Families made dozens, storing them in tins and reheating as needed throughout the season. Today's preference for simpler desserts means these tarts have nearly disappeared, but they once represented Christmas hospitality and the proper way to welcome guests with warmth. Taco salad trifle was the ultimate 1980s showpiece. Layers of lettuce, spiced beef, cheese, salsa, and crushed Doritos stacked in a glass bowl like edible confetti. It was part meal, part decoration, and fully beloved. Every layer told a story of color and crunch, a fusion of convenience and creativity. The Doritos gave it a neon orange glow that fit the decade perfectly. People admired it before eating it, marveling at its brightness. The first scoop was always a little chaotic, but that was part of the fun. It wasn't about precision. It was about plenty. This dish embodied the optimism of its era: fun, fearless, and a little loud. The crunch of chips, the spice of taco meat, the cool tang of sour cream, it was impossible not to smile. Taco salad trifle wasn't subtle, but neither was the 1980s. It was the taste of joy layered high. Potato candy was one of those desserts that sounded like a mistake, but tasted like a miracle. Born in Appalachian kitchens, it began with a single mashed potato, a cheap, filling staple turned unexpectedly sweet. Cooks would mix the potato with powdered sugar until it formed a dough, roll it out flat, and spread a layer of peanut butter across the top before rolling it tight like a jelly log. The result was a swirled candy, soft and rich, that melted in your mouth with the flavor of simplicity itself. It was a Christmas favorite for families with little to spare, proof that even the humblest ingredient could become something special. Children would slice the rolls and sneak bites while they were still soft, unable to wait for them to firm up in the cool air. Potato candy was a sweet born of imagination and survival, a dessert that turned necessity into joy. It may not fit modern ideas of confectionery art, but in those lean years, it was as treasured as any box of chocolates. Cheese ball towers were monuments of the 1980s holiday pride, standing tall in shimmering pyramids of cream cheese, herbs, and chopped nuts. Every family had their secret mix: cheddar, pimento, or maybe a hint of Worcestershire, rolled by hand and dusted with parsley until they gleamed like edible ornaments. They sat proudly in the middle of buffet tables, surrounded by buttery crackers, celery sticks, and laughter that carried from room to room. Guests would chip away at them through the night, reshaping the tower until it looked like a melted snowman of cheese and memory. The clink of cocktail glasses, the glow of tinsel, the hum of Bing Crosby on vinyl. These were the sounds that went with every bite. The cheese ball tower was never about fancy ingredients. It was about the ritual of gathering, of making something by hand and watching it disappear as conversations warmed. It was creamy, crumbly, and nostalgic in every sense. By the end of the night, only crumbs and a few broken crackers remained, proof that it had done its job. A 1980s Christmas party was not complete without it. A glittering tower of comfort, joy, and unapologetic excess, sitting proudly beside the punch bowl like an edible memory of merrier times. Tom and Jerry batter drink was the toast of every mid-century Christmas gathering, a warm and frothy cocktail that carried the hum of laughter and the glow of holiday lights. It was not just a drink, it was a ritual. Families gathered around punch bowls, the air heavy with the scent of nutmeg and rum, while someone carefully folded beaten egg whites into yolks and sugar. The result was a velvety batter spooned into mugs and topped with hot milk or brandy, frothing like a winter cloud. It was sweet, heavy, and meant to be sipped slowly while the record player hummed in the background. The Tom and Jerry was not for the faint-hearted. It took patience to make and could curdle with a careless stir. But those who mastered it had bragging rights, and each cup felt like liquid nostalgia. It was America's own festive elixir, a recipe that brought warmth to cold rooms and turned gatherings into memories. Dream Whip dessert topping mix was the miracle that turned every pie into a masterpiece. Grandma loved it because it did not need refrigeration, and in a crowded 1970s kitchen, that was a blessing. She would pull the little box from the cupboard, whisking milk and powder until it turned into a cloud of sweetness. Dream Whip was not just whipped topping, it was anticipation, the last touch before dessert reached perfection. It crowned lemon meringue pies, coated chocolate puddings, and softened the edges of even the toughest fruitcakes. You could taste the joy in every spoonful, light but indulgent, familiar yet special. Grandma always had an extra box tucked away just in case guests showed up unexpectedly. Dream Whip was holiday assurance, the creamy promise that no dessert would ever feel unfinished. Ambrosia salad was heaven in a bowl for Southern families who believed every feast deserved something sweet. Oranges, pineapple, cherries, coconut, and marshmallows came together in creamy unity, a mix of color and joy. Served chilled, it offered a burst of freshness amid all the heavy dishes. For many, it was the first thing made and the last thing finished, a dish that symbolized abundance. Its name, Ambrosia, food of the gods, fit perfectly. It wasn't about sophistication but sentiment. Every spoonful tasted of childhood, of porch gatherings and laughter echoing through warm kitchens. Ambrosia salad was passed between hands, not plates, because it was too pretty to portion out without admiration. Though it's disappeared from modern tables, it lives on in family memory, a dessert that carried both sweetness and nostalgia. Ambrosia salad was the heart's dessert, pure and simple. Jell-O molds with fruit suspended inside were edible art, shimmering in every color imaginable. They jiggled proudly from crystal bowls or ring molds, the crown jewel of every 1980s Christmas buffet. Cherries, mandarin oranges, or even canned pineapple slices floated like tiny ornaments inside. No holiday was complete without one, bright, wobbly, and full of personality. The first slice always drew gasps, the gelatin parting perfectly to reveal its jeweled treasures. It was the era's definition of beauty in food, fun, futuristic, and perfectly impractical. Children stared in awe, adults smiled with nostalgia, and every spoonful tasted like the sweetness of celebration. Sometimes it was made with whipped topping folded in for extra fluff, or layered by hand in stripes of green, red, and gold. No one called it refined, but everyone called it festive. Jell-O molds weren't just dessert. They were sculpture, history, and a little taste of magic on every holiday plate. People today might find it too rich or too much work, but that was the point. It was meant to be made together, to take time, to stir stories between sips. The foam clung to the rim of the cup, the same way joy clung to the season itself. Ribbon salad mold was the crown jewel of mid-century Christmas buffets, an edible rainbow layered in shimmering tiers of gelatin and cream. Every church potluck and family supper table in the 1950s seemed to have one, its wobbly surface glistening under the soft glow of tinsel-covered lights. Housewives poured each layer with precision, lime, strawberry, pineapple, waiting for one to set before adding the next. The cream cheese middle was the star, cutting the sweetness with a soft tang that made the whole thing sing. It was a dish born of pride and presentation, not convenience. People admired it more than they ate it, marveling at its even stripes and jewel tones. When refrigerators became the heart of the modern kitchen, gelatin molds became a symbol of progress, and ribbon salad mold ruled the holidays. Over time, it vanished, dismissed as a relic of artificial color and outdated taste. Yet, for those who remember, its wobble was more than food. It was a reflection of an age that believed every meal deserved a little glamour. 7-layer dip was the Tex-Mex miracle that made every 1980s party table complete. Built in glass dishes so everyone could admire its colorful stripes, it layered beans, sour cream, guacamole, salsa, cheese, olives, and tomatoes, like edible art. It was food you could see, food that invited curiosity before you even picked up a chip. The first scoop always broke the clean pattern, but that was part of the fun. By the end of the night, it looked like a joyful mess of color and taste. Every ingredient brought its own story. Canned refried beans for thrift, guacamole for trendiness, shredded cheese for comfort. It was multicultural celebration in a casserole dish, bold and unapologetically 1980s. Kids loved it for the color, adults for the spice, and everyone for the ease of it all. It turned any table into a fiesta, even under twinkling Christmas lights. In every creamy scoop was proof that food could be both casual and festive, both homemade and easy, a perfect symbol of its time. Shredded coconut snowflake. Tins were small pieces of joy before the baking even began. Grandma would bring them out with ceremony, their glittering metal lids shining under kitchen lights. The smell of coconut filled the air the second the tin opened, sweet and warm like the promise of snow. She sprinkled it over cakes, rolled it into candy balls, and pressed it gently onto frosting until every dessert looked like it had been dusted by winter itself. Kids would steal pinches, pretending they were just helping. The tins emptied fast, but they left behind the prettiest desserts you could imagine. By Christmas morning, the counters sparkled with coconut-covered memories, each bite tasting of sugar and nostalgia. Those tins were more than ingredients. They were decorations, relics of a season that glowed even without snow. Mock oyster soup was one of the Great Depression's most inventive creations, a meal that tasted luxurious without needing luxury. Families who couldn't afford fresh seafood found a way to mimic the flavor and texture of oysters using crumbled saltine crackers simmered in milk, butter, and onion broth. The crackers softened just enough to take on a silky bite, while the milk created a comforting, creamy base. A dash of Worcestershire sauce or celery salt gave it a faint sea aroma, enough to trick both the nose and the memory. Served with a sprinkle of pepper, it looked and felt like the real thing, warm, hearty, and homey. This dish symbolized the resilience of American cooks, especially women who refused to let scarcity steal dignity from the dinner table. It wasn't about imitation. It was about imagination. Mock oyster soup turned everyday ingredients into something that felt special, proving that even in hard times, hope could simmer quietly on the stove. Velveeta and Rotel dip was molten gold in a bowl, the unofficial fuel of every 1980s Christmas game night. Just 2 ingredients, Velveeta cheese and a can of Rotel tomatoes with green chilies, melted together into pure, creamy bliss. The slow cooker sat at the center of the room, bubbling away as guests hovered with tortilla chips in hand. The smell was sharp, salty, and irresistible. Every scoop stretched into strings of melted cheese, the kind that made you laugh mid-bite. It was cheap, it was easy, and it was absolutely beloved. There was no pretense, just comfort in its simplest, most glorious form. People gathered around it like it was the hearth itself, dipping, laughing, and wiping hands on napkins shaped like snowflakes. No dish captured the 1980s party spirit better, communal, casual, and a little over the top. Velveeta and Rotel dip didn't just feed people, it brought them together. Fig preserves cake was born in the rural South, where fig trees were common and nothing went to waste. Housewives gathered ripe figs at the end of summer, boiled them down into thick preserves, and saved them for special occasions, especially Christmas. The cake was heavy, dark, and sweet, flavored with spice and syrup, and brushed with more preserves after baking for shine. Each slice tasted like the memory of warm sunlight carried into winter. It was more than dessert. It was the story of Southern thrift and generosity, of families who made something grand from what they had. The batter came together slowly, stirred by hand in chipped ceramic bowls, while the scent of molasses and cinnamon filled the room. When the first bite met your tongue, it was soft and earthy, with a sweetness that deepened as it cooled. People brought it to church socials, wrapped in wax paper, as both offering and pride. For many families, this was the closest thing to fruitcake they could afford, and it quickly became a holiday tradition. The figs gave moisture, the spices gave warmth, and the love gave meaning. Today, it is a rare sight, forgotten among simpler sweets. But in its day, Fig cake was proof that homegrown ingredients could taste as rich as anything from a bakery. Jell-O molds with fruit suspended inside were edible art, shimmering in every color imaginable. They jiggled proudly from crystal bowls or ring molds, the crown jewel of every 1980s Christmas buffet. Cherries, mandarin oranges, or even canned pineapple slices floated like tiny ornaments inside. No holiday was complete without one, bright, wobbly, and full of personality. The first slice always drew gasps, the gelatin parting perfectly to reveal its jeweled treasures. It was the era's definition of beauty in food, fun, futuristic, and perfectly impractical. Children stared in awe, adults smiled with nostalgia, and every spoonful tasted like the sweetness of celebration. Sometimes it was made with whipped topping folded in for extra fluff, or layered by hand in stripes of green, red, and gold. No one called it refined, but everyone called it festive. Jell-O molds weren't just dessert. They were sculpture, history, and a little taste of magic on every holiday plate. Spiced apple snow was a dessert born from imagination and a few humble ingredients, long before electric mixers or instant puddings ever existed. It was made by beating stewed apples with sugar, spice, and whipped egg whites until it transformed into something light as air, a pale, cloud-like confection with a cinnamon glow. In colonial kitchens, it was considered both elegant and thrifty, a sweet reward after a year of careful preservation. By the 1800s, spiced apple snow graced Christmas tables as a symbol of simplicity done beautifully. It melted on the tongue, cool and fragrant, the kind of dessert that did not overwhelm but lingered softly. Children would watch in awe as apples turned into clouds under their mother's spoons, proof that magic could happen in a bowl. It may have vanished from modern cookbooks, but its spirit remains in every whipped cream topping and apple pie filling we still hold dear. Swiss Miss marshmallow lovers. Cocoa packets were the definition of happiness for the grandkids. Grandma always kept a box tucked behind the tea tins, waiting for the right cold night. She would pour steaming milk into mugs, tear open those shiny packets, and let the cocoa swirl like magic. The extra marshmallows, tiny and sweet, floated to the top like snowflakes on chocolate. Kids would sip carefully, hands wrapped around the warm cup, eyes glowing brighter than the tree lights. It was instant comfort, a kind of joy you could taste. Even the adults would sneak a cup when no one was looking. The smell filled the living room, sweet, cozy, unmistakably Christmas. Swiss Miss was not fancy, but it was the kind of treat that brought everyone together by the fire, laughing and remembering what warmth really felt like. The crinkle of the packet, the swirl of the spoon, the faint hiss of milk on the stove, all of it became part of the soundtrack of December. Grandma made it a ritual: cocoa, carols, and the soft hum of contentment that only winter nights can bring. The marshmallows always melted too fast, but that was part of the charm, like fleeting snow. Every cup she poured carried her quiet gift of comfort, a sweetness that outlasted the season itself. Apple butter cake was autumn distilled into sweetness, the kind of dessert that wrapped a whole season in one comforting slice. The heart of the recipe was apple butter. Apples cooked for hours until thick, dark, and fragrant with cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg. Mixed into a simple batter of flour, sugar, and eggs, it created a cake that was moist, spiced, and rich without being heavy. The scent of it baking filled homes with the warmth of hearth and harvest. For farm families, it was a way to use their preserves before the new crop came in. For city dwellers, it was a taste of the countryside, nostalgic and grounding. Some topped it with caramel glaze or cream cheese frosting, while others left it plain, letting the apple's natural sweetness shine. Served on floral china or plain tin plates, it never failed to feel special. Every crumb carried memory of wood stoves and orchards, of hands stirring patiently, of cool evenings spent watching leaves turn gold. It was a bridge between eras, a dessert that never shouted but always spoke of care. Though boxed cakes and instant mixes eventually replaced it, nothing ever quite captured its soul. Apple butter cake remains a quiet anthem to home, to slowness, and to love baked steady and true. cheese ball towers were monuments of the 1980s holiday pride, standing tall in shimmering pyramids of cream cheese, herbs, and chopped nuts. Every family had their secret mix: cheddar, pimento, or maybe a hint of Worcestershire, rolled by hand and dusted with parsley until they gleamed like edible ornaments. They sat proudly in the middle of buffet tables, surrounded by buttery crackers, celery sticks, and laughter that carried from room to room. Guests would chip away at them through the night, reshaping the tower until it looked like a melted snowman of cheese and memory. The clink of cocktail glasses, the glow of tinsel, the hum of Bing Crosby on vinyl. These were the sounds that went with every bite. The cheese ball tower was never about fancy ingredients. It was about the ritual of gathering, of making something by hand, and watching it disappear as conversations warmed. It was creamy, crumbly, and nostalgic in every sense. By the end of the night, only crumbs and a few broken crackers remained, proof that it had done its job. A 1980s Christmas party was not complete without it. A glittering tower of comfort, joy, and unapologetic excess, sitting proudly beside the punch bowl like an edible memory of merrier times. Date nut bread was once the quiet soul of Christmas baking, rich and dark with the scent of coffee and spice. It was baked in small loaf pans, wrapped in wax paper and tied with ribbon before being shared with neighbors and friends. Each slice told a story of thrift and love, sweetened with chopped dates and crunchy walnuts. The Depression-era kitchen was full of such recipes, born not from abundance, but from imagination. Dates added sweetness when sugar was scarce, and nuts stretched the batter further without waste. Served warm with butter or cream cheese, it was both humble and indulgent. Date nut bread was a gift you baked, not bought, and in that act of giving, it became something sacred. Today, it is mostly forgotten, lost among flashier desserts and faster lives. But if you ever taste it again, the deep caramel flavor, the softness, the quiet comfort, you will remember that some of the richest things come from the simplest hands. Marble Pound Cake Loaf from Sara Lee was the kind of treat Grandma kept in her freezer like a secret. It was never for everyday eating. It was for surprise company or when she just wanted something to go with coffee. The swirls of chocolate and vanilla looked too perfect to be store-bought, and that was the beauty of it. You could thaw it in minutes, slice it neatly, and serve it on her favorite china like it had come straight from the oven. The cake was soft, buttery, and comforting, a quiet luxury that made even the simplest visits feel festive. Grandma loved that it never failed her. Always the same, always delicious, always ready. In a decade full of instant mixes and boxed meals, this one carried pride. It was her emergency dessert, her Christmas standby, her frozen reminder that hospitality never had to wait. Potato candy was one of those desserts that sounded like a mistake, but tasted like a miracle. Born in Appalachian kitchens, it began with a single mashed potato, a cheap, filling staple turned unexpectedly sweet. Cooks would mix the potato with powdered sugar until it formed a dough, roll it out flat, and spread a layer of peanut butter across the top before rolling it tight like a jelly log. The result was a swirled candy, soft and rich, that melted in your mouth with the flavor of simplicity itself. It was a Christmas favorite for families with little to spare, proof that even the humblest ingredient could become something special. Children would slice the rolls and sneak bites while they were still soft, unable to wait for them to firm up in the cool air. Potato candy was a sweet born of imagination and survival, a dessert that turned necessity into joy. It may not fit modern ideas of confectionery art, but in those lean years, it was as treasured as any box of chocolates. Celery and olive relish trays were once the quiet opening act of every Thanksgiving feast. Before the turkey, before the sides, came the cool crunch of celery stuffed with pimento cheese or cream cheese and the briny bite of olives. They offered a balance, freshness, before the richness to come. Housewives prided themselves on arranging them neatly, often on cut glass trays. Children would sneak olives off the plate, pretending not to like them but always coming back for more. It was a simple tradition, but one that marked the beginning of the meal with grace and order. Over time, the relish tray faded, replaced by charcuterie boards and modern appetizers. Yet it remains a symbol of hospitality from a slower, more deliberate age. Celery and olive relish trays were Thanksgiving's crisp, elegant overture. Which vintage Christmas recipe are you bringing back to your table? Hit like and subscribe for more forgotten holiday treasures.